This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
You know, we probably should have had on tape the fact that I tried just now to screw up Sam Bankman-Fried, and because I was trying, I actually got it right.
Yeah, that would have been nice, but unfortunately, I slipped on the recording start there, so my mistake on that one.
Happy Sunday! How are you at this altar bard on a Sunday morning?
I'm well, sir. I'm thankful. How was your Thanksgiving? We had a delightful and frankly unexpected Thanksgiving feast on Wednesday. I thought that party would not necessarily be a full blown Thanksgiving lunch, but there it was, and I indulged.
It's something, don't they? The restaurant really kind of steps it up for this thing. They're showing they put their best foot forward, and we're talking about Engine Company, and they do what's become a tradition, a Thanksgiving feast on the Wednesday before. And Gary joined us. Was this your first or second time?
No, absolutely my first by several months. And yes, Engine Company 28 in downtown Los Angeles for anyone who's interested in stopping by and checking out their wares, because the food is fantastic. And I will say the Thanksgiving feast was delightful. They had all the fixins, the ham, the turkey, the stuffing. They had all the traditional things. And then about an hour after I sat down and I thought I was done eating, I took it easy because I knew I had a Thanksgiving feast the following day. But about an hour after I sat down and 30 or 40 minutes after I stopped eating, a kitchen staff member came out and said to somebody at the table I was sitting at, "Would you like a tamale? We have fresh made tamales." And oh my goodness, those tamales were fantastic. I ate 2 or 3 of them, and God, I was absolutely delighted. So I've
often thought of converting one day a week, at least maybe Tuesdays, into a Mexican outpost, because some of the Mexican food that comes out of there is just incredible.
You would be doing everyone a favor if you did that, because it was fantastic.
Yeah, well, Gary, you may have just hit on something, so I'll have to give you a royalty. So, I know that it's nominally not a legal story, but you and I are people who watch a little football. And as I was watching a little football, I saw 2 things, or I saw one thing that reminded me of yet another thing. The reception that former President Trump got at a college football game yesterday. Do you have this?
I do. This is South Carolina Clemson, and it's a little long, so we'll play it and you can call your own out.
Because I want to, for those who aren't watching, it may not be as interesting, but you had a full stadium and
full stadium, 60, 70,000 people at least. And I don't know if you could faintly hear it there, but somebody who was nearby the camera was chanting USA very loudly, but the crowd just generally was going absolutely bonkers.
Right. And so in the kind of the circles that I travel in, the bubble that I suppose that some people would accuse me of living in, people would say, well, that's the deep South, or there would be kind of that caveat, if you will. And I keep saying, well, I wonder where Joe Biden would get that kind of reception, where I can't imagine that it would be at an SC UCLA game. I could be wrong. But it then made me think about another clip that I had seen in one of the bastions of a Democratic stronghold. You have that there, Gary?
Yes, I do. You're referring to UFC 295, which occurred recently, where President Trump came out with a few other notables. We'll watch a little bit of that, and you can call your own out again.
Suffice it to say, Gary, that let me make a bold prediction that as of right now, and I know that I famously bet a erstwhile partner of mine about the 2016 election. I will tell you that if the Democrats think that the 91 counts, I love when they always say that 91 indictments, it's 91 counts of separate indictments. And the civil trials and everything else is harming the former president's chances, and they can't see what's happening here. I would tell them that they need a wake-up call. And if taking a look at these two events, both of which happened within the span of 10 days, almost bookended?
Something like that. And just to be clear, that second clip that we just played was from a UFC event, which admittedly is, a certain audience, but that was in New York City. That was in Madison Square Garden, UFC 295. So I would say that's certainly not the Deep South. Yeah.
And I think that some people in the Democratic establishment ought to wake up to what's happening, because this is not, my humble opinion, it's not going well. And for them, I was struck yesterday by, I think it was yesterday, we've talked about the DC gag order, correct?
Yeah, we have. Absolutely. Last week.
Yeah. Do you have that little clip? Because I think it's a good setup to where we're going. DC gag order, for those who don't remember, is the judge in the District of Columbia on what they call the J6 prosecution, which everybody is at least on one side of the aisle is cheering on as the case that's going to take out Trump, and it's set for March of next year. And the judge has imposed a gag order. And I invite you, by the way, you'll hear what one of the commentators said, and I like Joyce Vance. I mean, as a commentator, and I've been wrong in my prognostications, but listen to what she had to say, which we played earlier.
Yep, absolutely. Here we go.
Joyce, it is always good to see you. Thank you for being here. My first question is just: is there a question in your mind as to whether this gag order is gonna hold up in the appeals court?
No, there's absolutely no question. This is a very limited restraining order that preserves Trump's rights to engage in political speech. The Court of Appeals may even go ahead and put it back in place during oral argument. That doesn't happen very often, a ruling from the bench during an oral argument. This may be the standout case because of Trump's ongoing conduct.
Yeah, the fact that Trump literally...
It's like I say, I feel her pain for being spectacularly wrong, because I've been there, done that. The fact is, however, if you listen to the oral arguments, and I've done that as the legal nerd that I am, it is clear that the Court of Appeals, and mind you, all three judges are Democrat appointees.
Yep.
All three judges in that case had a real problem with trying to define what the scope of that order could be. And rightfully so, because you're talking about a political campaign. You are approximately 4 to 5 months outside of the Super Tuesday, 4 to 5 months right before when they set the trial in this case. You're talking about clearly the judges. And by the way, shout out to the Trump's appellate lawyer, who was a former either Solicitor General or Attorney General, and because I thought he did a magnificent job in fielding the questions and always course correcting the core political speech, bringing up, by the way, not once, not twice, but at least 3 times in the argument, the Gentile case, which you and I have talked about repeatedly. Gentile was the case out of Nevada where the Nevada State Bar was trying to admonish a criminal defense lawyer, Gentile, for responding to government statements about his client and basically defending himself. Here you've got not only, the reason this is so fascinating, and I keep coming back to this gag order, is you've not only got a criminal case, but you have a prosecution which involves the last election and the next presidential election. They kept talking about the Brown case, which I think was out of Louisiana, which was for insurance commissioner. Here you're talking about a presidential election. This idea of a lot of commentators, if you will, that somehow this is just an easy case for the district court and an easy case for the Court of Appeal is really minimizing the core political speech issues and the tension between the first and the sixth and the other stuff. Why do I bring this up? Well, not only did the oral arguments get mischaracterized in a lot of the media that I saw, oh, they're skeptical, they're this or that. And Joyce, to her credit, was spectacularly wrong in her prediction. Not only did they not vacate it, but by all indications, it looks like they're going to restrict it. And by the way, that's not going to be the last word, because clearly they also invoke, besides Gentile, the Shepard case, which one of the judges called the canonical, meaning kind of the standard in these cases. But there are First and Sixth Amendment tensions here that somebody's going to have to resolve. And I'm going to make the bold prediction that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to have to get involved, because this idea that you can, without a sufficient record, that the threats in the D.C. case have crossed the line from First Amendment protection to whether it's the terms of President Trump's release or his right to have a fair trial. The DOJ did something interesting. When I say DOJ, the Office of Special Counsel, they filed an addendum either day before yesterday, where they cited the threats in the New York case, and they filed that in the D.C. case, because the record in D.C. is absolutely devoid at the district court level of any meaningful threat other than a woman who is described as a heavy alcoholic sitting on her couch watching the news in Texas, who was arrested. And as Trump's lawyer said, I invite you to go look at the probable cause affidavit. This woman was unmoored from any social media and unmoored from reality and was watching what is traditionally described as legacy media. There were no threats. So what the Office of Special Counsel has done is try to import threats in New York into the D.C. case. And at the appellate level, because there's nothing in the record in the D.C. case that would support the restrictions that have been made. Why is that interesting? In the D.C. case, if you listen to the oral argument, the judges are saying, don't bother me with New York. That was a different situation because the judge's clerk in New York is running for political office. And that basically they're saying that's a different situation than here in D.C., where you've just got court staff that are just doing their job. So what does the government do? The Office of Special Counsel do? They ignore all of that back and forth, and they just import the New York threats to see if they can salvage what was or is a record that is devoid of any support for this kind of blanket gag order that has been imposed on the leading presidential candidate who's engaged in court political speech in the middle of an election campaign.
Yeah, it's almost like they're just trying to copy paste, something where they're like, okay, well, over here we've got this issue. We don't have a problem here. We don't have a problem in DC, but over in New York we've got something we can bring over. And I saw it cited that there was over 270 pages of single spaced transcriptions of threats and voicemails or whatever that have been made against that judge and his clerk, which is great. No one's ignoring that. No one's saying that's not happening, but we've got to have church and state here. We can't just be bringing these all together as though they're all one thing, because they're not.
And by the way, not only are they not, I invite you, if you've got any pushback on this, listen to the oral argument.
Yeah.
The judges in the oral argument were specifically saying that don't give me the New York example. You can always come in here on emergency motion. You can always come in here. That's fair game if you're going to comment on somebody who's got a political affiliation or a bias on the court staff. So what does the Office of Special Counsel do? They run over there and they get the very thing that the judges were saying, don't bother me with that because that's not the situation here. And they're trying to say, well, maybe you guys forgot everything that we were talking about for hours in the oral argument. We're going to give you those threats anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you. I encourage people to go listen to the oral arguments because to watch the aforementioned mainstream media or legacy media, you would not necessarily understand this. It's something that someone has to kind of want and seek out in order to understand it with a comprehensive.
It's astonishing how this gets covered, and you would think that there would be a little bit of, you tether yourself a little bit to what's actually happening as opposed to kind of what you want to happen, so to speak, which is kind of the reporting on this. There is no question that there is a fundamental issue that needs to, as you know, Gary, I've been saying that Shepard v. Maxwell, which was called the canonical case, needs to be revisited. This may be the case where it gets revisited.
I agree. I think that it might. All right.
Now, the other issue is for people who are focused on that case, that's the case that will probably go to trial. I've heard that a million times. That's going to be the coup de grace, if you will, on Trump. Well, I will tell you that the Georgia case, I don't think there's any chance that that's going to get to trial prior to the election. I don't think there's any chance that the classified documents case is going to get to trial before the election. This is the last case, other than what's called the New York hush money case, that would get to trial. And I think either on this issue of the gag order or on the issue of whether or not he had presidential immunity at the time, one of those two issues is going to get before the U.S. Supreme Court, in my humble opinion, and that is going to derail this prosecution before the election.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch. Circling back to the start of the show where we were talking about your propensity to screw up names, that was actually because I screwed up a name. I screwed up a name from the Georgia prosecution. I called someone Floyd Harrison, and that was absolutely my mistake. And then you started joking that is your propensity with Sam Bankman-Fried. So do you want to talk a little bit about the developments in that one?
Yes, why don't we? I'll let you set this up because this is interesting also.
All right. So you guys might remember Harrison Floyd was one of the defendants in the Georgia case. I believe there were 17 of them. And he was the one who we discussed back in August, who presented himself, flew down to Georgia to present himself for the charges he was facing, and was denied bail, at least initially. He was eventually given bail, but he was the only one who was denied bail. And there was a bit of a spicy back and forth with the judge where he was arguing, I've come all the way down here. I'm I'm not a flight risk. And he was denied bail regardless. He is now in hot water for some comments that he has made on social media and in a podcast. And try as I might, I could not figure out where that podcast was. None of the media that is covering this story will identify the podcast. I understand that they have a slant that they may not want to give press to this gentleman or to the people that were hosting him on the podcast. But he is now allegedly reportedly facing a revocation of his bail as a result of his posts. And I don't know. I've looked at the posts in question, and I'm not necessarily sure how we got there.
Well, I would love to talk to him. I don't know that his lawyer would ever allow that, but I would love to, with you, talk to him, because we got so much feedback from, and rightfully so, from playing the clip of him in the courtroom. I thought effectively and persuasively presenting his case to the judge, that I got on a plane to come here to surrender. And just because I haven't hired a lawyer yet, you're going to detain me, which makes zero sense.
Yeah, I agree. And you're right. We did get a lot of feedback from that episode that we did where we played that clip. And I think you and I were both rightfully a little fired up in that episode, because it was a ridiculous situation of, after 16 people have all been given reasonable bail that was mostly, pre-negotiated with the attorneys and quick and easy situation where people come in and present themselves and then they take care of their bail and they're out and gone. This gentleman flies down from somewhere in the Northeast and comes to Georgia, and they go, no, you don't have a lawyer, then you're not getting bail.
The thing that, and the fascination that I have with all of these cases involving Trump is, and I know that there's, with the exception of the classified documents case, but if we're talking Georgia and we're talking the so-called J6 case involving the Office of Special Counsel, and if you listen to the oral arguments or if you watch the proceedings in Georgia, which periodically are televised, there is so much of this that is core political speech. And core political speech gets the highest level of constitutional scrutiny. And when you start injecting criminal prosecution into core political speech, that's such a dangerous area. And I think at a certain point, it shows that you have I've been arguing this for 30 years, but the criminalization of the political process is always fraught with danger. And we're seeing it play out both in Georgia and in Washington, D.C. And I think in terms of a bold prediction, I think that it is something that is even fraught with danger. I don't think is accurate enough. I think it's a very, very slippery slope. And it's great when your team, so to speak, bringing it back to the stadium thing that we're watching, or that we watched at the beginning. It's great when your team is on offense, but when you're on defense, you certainly have a different view on how this looks.
Speaking of different views, these episodes are always my favorite, because it's always fascinating to hear you come from a different angle than you might in private conversation. Because for anyone who listens to these things and sometimes thinks that Mark is not necessarily on the side that he purports to be on, I can assure you he is on the side he purports to be on, but he's also an arbiter of fairness and wants to make sure that both sides are argued. So always fun to do an episode with you where you're kind of taking the devil's advocate stance and defending a side that might not be your own.
Well, it's something that needs to be pointed out.
Yes, absolutely. It's important. And that's why I'm pointing it out, because, you, for anyone who wants to call you names, you are definitely on the side of fairness and justice. So I think that's a very good thing and rare in this day and age.
And thank you, Gary.
Mark,
GPS. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, sir. Have a great rest of your Sunday. And thank you all for listening. We watch this episode on YouTube, youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast, and subscribe while you're there. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.